What do you think of when you imagine a Broadway producer? Today, a famous movie probably comes to mind, but in 1926, readers of Everybody's Magazine were given this colorful description of a stereotypical theater producer.
Do you picture a stout party with a battered derby on the back of his bullet head, who reclines with his feet on the back of an orchestra seat while he puffs at a terrible cigar and bellows at a shivering chorus? Or perhaps you always think of the producer as a melancholy gentleman in somber garments who runs wan fingers through a mop of tousled hair while he moans pitifully at the wretched cast before him, or bursts into masterpieces of blistering invective. At rehearsals nowadays, the chances are about to even you will see something like this. Into the dimly lit theater, where the anxious cast is waiting for the boss to appear, strolls a willowy, quietly dressed young woman with a crown of golden hair. She sinks quickly into an orchestra seat. Her pretty blue eyes flash over the stage. Meanwhile, the director and the cast have gone at rehearsal again, hammer and tongs. The boss has arrived.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Beal. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Nooks and Crannies of History. If you enjoy hearing the stories of fascinating people from the past, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a future episode. I'm in the archives room at Brucemore, a historic site in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I want to show you one of my favorite items from the collection. This scrapbook, created by Irene Douglas, isn't one of the flashiest items we have, but as a theater nerd, I was drawn to it. Irene used this book to save playbills and clippings from the many performances she attended during her visits to New York and Chicago. It's a wonderful snapshot of popular entertainment in the 1920s and 30s. On this page, I found a piece of the playbill for Craig's Wife, a 1925 play by George Kelly. The playbill has Rosalie Stewart's name on the producer's line. This stuck out to me as the only playbill in the scrapbook that listed a woman as the producer. Now, when I was in grad school, one of my favorite parts of my classes was finding something in an archive that led me down a research rabbit hole. This is exactly what happened when I found Rosalie Stewart's name. Through further digging, I discovered newspaper articles documenting her career. Rosalie Stewart made a name for herself as one of the sharpest business minds in entertainment. I don't think it would be a stretch to call her one of the most influential people in Broadway in the 1920s. Rosalie Stewart was born in St. Louis on October 9, 1890. Her birth name was Rosalie Muckenfuss, but she legally changed her name in 1917 for business reasons, a move that her two younger brothers followed. There's a fun anecdote about this name change that I came across in a few sources. When Rosalie met the playwright George Kaufman, she told him that her brothers Lee and Stewart had also changed their last name. Kaufman responded by asking, "What was Stewart's name before he changed it? Muckenfuss Muckenfuss?" Before she became famed Broadway producer Rosalie Stewart, young Rosalie Muckenfuss got an early start in theater management by working for her father, Vaudeville booking agent Benjamin Stewart Muckenfuss. Vaudeville was at the height of its popularity in the first 2 decades of the 20th century, so Rosalie had a great opportunity to hone her skills in a busy industry. Cultural historian Dr. David Minot describes vaudeville operating on a chain store principle, bringing theater to the audience through several small venues that were part of circuits owned by a larger company. These small theaters changed their programs weekly to encourage repeat audiences. This fast turnover meant that a booking agent like Benjamin Muckenfuss would be constantly searching for new acts to play his circuit. Growing up, Rosalie was fascinated by her father's work. When the Orpheum Circuit sent him to manage the Majestic Theater in Dallas, 16-year-old Rosalie asked to come along. During one performance where Rosalie worked as a ticket taker, she was arrested, along with her father and the performers, for violating local laws that banned performances on Sundays. Rosalie sued the police commissioner and the chief of police for $10,000 each, stating that she had been arrested without warrant and without probable cause. While newspapers didn't report on the result of this suit, we can see that even as a teenager, Rosalie had the fierce determination that she applied to her career as a producer. Shortly after this trip to Dallas, Benjamin Muckenfuss became ill and experienced temporary blindness. Rosalie left school to take over his business. Her skill as a manager was noticed by the president of her father's circuit. He offered Rosalie an assistant booking manager role in Chicago. Her work in the Windy City led to receiving a job offer from the Keith Vaudeville circuit in New York, where she was hired as the Southern booking manager. Entertainment periodicals reported that this was the first time a woman had held such a leadership position in the company. Rosalie loved working for the Keith Company. Nothing gave me a greater dramatic thrill than to weigh the value of the content of some play that was presented and visualize its possibilities, she told Everybody's Magazine. As I learned more of the workings of the theater, the ambition to produce became the great motivating power of my existence. With this motivation, Rosalie decided to begin producing vaudeville sketches on the side. Producing these short plays was a chance for her to move beyond booking talent and apply her artistic knowledge and skills to creating something new. What started as a side hustle producing sketches evolved into her career as one of the most successful Broadway producers of the 1920s. Some of the secondary sources I found during my research incorrectly describe Rosalie Stewart as the first woman to produce on Broadway, or the only female producer of her time. Rosalie was actually working at a time when several women were making names for themselves as producers. Remember that quote I read at the beginning of the video? It's from an article that profiled 4 women whom the author, Nanette Lincoln, described as responsible for many of the most famous Broadway successes. Nanette mentions that in 1926, there were already some 10 or 12 women play producers in America. While women weren't producing the majority of Broadway shows, producing became a more accessible career for women in the early 20th century after Renee Harris became the first woman to produce on Broadway in 1912. Renee Harris was the wife of Broadway producer Henry B. Harris. Renee met her husband while she was working as a legal secretary to pay for law school. The couple married in 1889 and moved into the Wellington Hotel, where they met past Nooks and Crannies subject Evelyn Nesbit. Henry trusted Renee's judgment on theater, and he consulted her for his projects even before their marriage. This laid the groundwork for Renee to take over the business after Henry died in the sinking of the Titanic. Renee decided to carry on her husband's legacy and produced several successful shows, despite criticism from the press. She told Nanette Lincoln, "I bore the brunt of adverse criticism against a woman play producer. One theatrical paper went to the length of saying that it gave me 6 months to lose all of my husband's estate. That was 14 years ago, and we are still flourishing. For a long while, however, I felt rather alone, so I am glad now to welcome such running mates as Rosalie Stewart, Jessie Bonstell, and Ann Nichols." Jessie Bonstell and Ann Nichols were featured in the article alongside Rosalie and Renee as some of Broadway's most successful producers. Jessie Bonstell was an actress, playwright, and director who made her producing debut with the first stage adaptation of Little Women. Ann Nichols was a playwright who mortgaged her home to produce her play Abie's Irish Rose, a comedy about an Irish Catholic woman and a Jewish man who married despite disapproval from their families. While the play was panned by critics, it became a hit with audiences. Abie's Irish Rose made Ann Nichols one of the highest-grossing Broadway producers of the 1920s. Even with several women successfully producing in New York, newspapers made Rosalie Stewart's gender a focus of their reports on her work, with headlines like, "Miss Stewart proves woman can succeed as producer of plays on Broadway," "Woman play producer has faith in American drama," and "Rosalie Stewart proves woman's ability in the theatrical game," ran above articles that contrasted her femininity with her business acumen. Harriet Ashbrook wrote for the Brooklyn Daily Eagle in 1925,
"The advent of the woman producer in the theatrical world in the last 5 years has caused much comment. Producing plays has always been regarded as essentially a man's business. At best, it was gambling on long shots, investing between $20,000 and $30,000, with a chance that the play might last anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 years. As a sex, women have always been notoriously poor gamblers. They're afraid to take chances. So the success that has attended the ventures of Rosalie Stewart has been viewed with more than an ordinary amount of surprise. In view of all this and much more which has been going the rounds of the theatrical world during the last 2 or 3 years regarding this remarkable young woman, it was with considerable interest that we went down to her office on 47th Street recently to interview her. Her dress was smartly tailored, but her slippers were utterly feminine. Her desk was the desk of a busy executive with a bunch of violets on it. She talked about business problems with decisive sureness, and in a split second changed the conversation to a luncheon she had just attended, relating details that could only interest a woman.
Her producing career wasn't the first time Rosalie had appeared in papers for doing something that seemed unusual for her gender. A 1901 St. Louis Post-Dispatch article reported on a girls' baseball team beating a team of boys. The author, Rose Marion, wrote,
"Just imagine how it must be to be a boy and have a girl beat you at your own game. The girls have been in training since June. The boys have played since they could hold a ball, and yet the girls pitched better, caught better, and were weak only in fielding. Their pitcher is Rosalie Muckinfuss, and she throws like a boy. Physiologists have said that the structure of a woman's clavicle makes it impossible for her to throw man fashion. Rosalie is an exception."
Rosalie saw no conflict between being a woman and being a successful producer. She told Everybody's Magazine,
"Women are great theater goers and really decide the rise or fall of many plays. Well then, if a woman goes to the theater and really studies the plays that she and her friends like, she's going to get a pretty good idea of what the average woman enjoys in a play."
Having a good idea of what the average woman and the average man enjoyed in a play was a special skill of Rosalie's. Papers remarked on her skill in producing plays that appealed to a wide audience. She was meticulous about every detail of her work, beginning with selecting scripts, directors, and actors for her projects. She attended every rehearsal for the plays she produced and attended every performance for the first 2 weeks of a play's run. During those 2 opening weeks, she would watch the play from different seats, evaluating how audiences reacted. She even assigned her employees to stand in the lobby during intermission and after the performance to listen to audience comments and report them back to her. With these observations, she was able to finely tune her radar for what would be a hit with Broadway audiences. Her biggest successes in theater came through collaborations with the playwright George Kelly. Rosalie met George during her early days producing vaudeville sketches. She encouraged him to develop one of his sketches into a full-length play and produced it with her own company. In 1924, she produced George's play, The Show-Off. This play became the hit comedy of the season and was voted to win the Pulitzer Prize. The vote was overruled in favor of Hellbent for Heaven, written by Columbia professor Hatcher Hughes. Several of the prize's jurors resigned after this decision. Despite this setback, George would win the Pulitzer for his next play produced by Rosalie, Craig's Wife, the same play that Irene Douglas documented in her theater scrapbook. Rosalie Stewart's keen mind for business led her to Hollywood in the 1930s. With the arrival of sound film, she saw an opportunity to advance her career in a new medium. She became one of the most successful authors' agents in the film industry, supporting the work of both emerging and established screenwriters. While movies became her focus, Rosalie made a return to Broadway in 1941 to produce the play Letters to Lucerne. She continued to have success in her career in both film and theater until she retired in 1961 after 21 years of running her agency. Rosalie passed away in 1971, leaving her agency to her younger brother, Stewart. So what can we take away from Rosalie Stewart's story? She was one of the most influential people in entertainment in the 1920s and 1930s, but is rarely mentioned today other than as a footnote in the biographies of the playwrights and actors she worked with. While I was researching, I found it difficult to find information about Rosalie's personal life. The articles I read described her as a private person, focusing on sharing her work and quick to give credit to her employees. One of my biggest takeaways from researching Rosalie Stewart is that the headlines proclaiming her uniqueness as a woman producer aren't that far off from modern stories about women in the theater industry. Women are still underrepresented in theater. A recent report by Playbill shows that 16 of the 38 productions in the 23-24 Broadway season were directed by women. 7 new musicals were written by women, the highest number since the 1949-1950 season. The Lilies, an organization that promotes gender equity in theater, released a study showing that at nonprofit theaters nationwide, 39% of new plays produced were written by women, with plays by BIPOC women being the least represented. Who produces theater matters in these statistics, because producers are the ones deciding whose work will receive funding. To increase the diversity of stories being told on American stages, we need diverse producers. Women like Rosalie Stewart, Renee Harris, Ann Nichols, and Jessie Bonstell all helped to pave the way for more women to enter the field. Now, we need a theater industry that continues to build on that foundation, to allow more opportunities for people of all genders, ethnicities, and orientations to be able to share their stories. Thank you for watching this episode of Nooks and Crannies of History. If you want to hear more interesting stories of people from the past, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss another episode.